Well, hello, everybody. We're back here with another William Carey University Worship Colloquium. And in this assignment, if you will, that we are joined by my good friend, buddy, Fred Heumann. And Fred and I go back some years at this point for varying reasons. Probably beginning first with the music industry kind of connections, and then later on through worship studies and that kind of thing. But today, Fred and I are going to talk about something that he and I are so used to, and that's kind of the idea of lifelong learning. And we're kind of at that point where it's like we probably could stop because we've learned so much in essence, but that's just not how we're wired. And we're learning that it's a good thing to kind of remain in that kind of mindset throughout our lives. So Fred, welcome, hanging out with our worship leadership and worship technology students. And so
be this person, but I'm glad to have the opportunity.
So tell for those who don't know about the Fred Heumann, kind of in a nutshell, what should you tell us about you?
The question. What should I tell you? Well, first of all, if you talk about lifelong learners, you got to find an old guy, so that would be me. No, most of my ministry life has been adjusting, whether it's been cross-culturally, multiple church situations, working as a missionary, being itinerant, and now working alongside a team of people in Ukraine. That's been my life. And to be honest, as we're getting into this, I actually have to remind myself that not everybody has had the experiences that I've had.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because I tend to judge, or at least in my head, I'm going, well, why don't they understand? Well, dummy, you've been in 50 countries. You've been in just every kind of Protestant church in North America and many overseas. And you've been forced to work in cross-cultural situations. So I have to give myself a break before I break somebody else to understand that. I mean, I started ministry, even the group I was in growing up in Ohio was an interdenominational group, and I was a Catholic kid growing up. There were Lutherans and Nazarenes and Baptists, etc., in that group, and then wound up joining the group that inspired them, Continental Singers, and for 15 years, I guess, with Continentals, went to multiple countries, but also did thousands of concerts in every possible kind of North American Protestant church and some not Protestant churches through that time. So and then I had a full-time group that worked overseas, that worked in schools in the British Commonwealth. So lots of time in England, in Australia and New Zealand, in South Africa, in Western Europe, and even in those days going behind the Iron Curtain into Poland.
Wow.
To Leningrad, as it was known then, St. Petersburg now, in Russia, and even to China in the 80s. And so I've been forced into that mindset. And even the churches I've served in music ministry have been incredibly varied. So it's more understanding, I guess, that not everything is wrong. It may just be different.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that the challenge is, what do we do in shaping our ministry so that it stands up against biblical standards, historical precedent, and orthodoxy with a lowercase o, but also fits in that situation. I wound up in a leadership role for Youth for Christ, the international version of Youth for Christ. And so we had 150 countries. So when we got together for an event, whether it was in Hong Kong, Manila, or Nairobi, and I worked events in all of those, we had to take into account not just we had to take into account language, culture, denomination, et cetera, and communication. So I'm used to that. So forgive me if I assume a lot of stuff, guys, but I really want you to understand that for me now at 64, I'm just now finishing. Luke says it seemed like 5 years and you've been trying to finish this doctorate in worship studies, because I need to learn. I need to know. I want to be able to add those things to what God's called me to do.
Well, when you and I were discussing what would be something that you and I could unpack, for my students, what would be relevant from your background for them? They're so young. What would be good for them? And right now, I've kind of encapsulated a title for this is like thriving as a lifelong learner in the worship environment, because that's where you and I have been. but in a message from you initially, you were like, what do we call this? And I'm just going to read this. It said, how to function and thrive in a wide variety of worship situations / traditions, or how to bring value to every worship situation you're in, or preparing to be flexible as a worship leader or team member or whatever. All of that applies.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because now people would say, this is going to be long.
Well, it all points to the goal here is, my students are going to be, or hopefully will take hold of the opportunity to be in all sorts of settings and backgrounds across denominational lines, and hopefully in other countries and what have you, both on the side of worship leading from the music perspective, but also from the behind the scenes production technical side of things. And you had the joy of tackling kind of much of that with Continentals and other things of going around the world. And then your current work today in the Ukraine. So maybe let's just take some minutes here and this be casual conversation of just chatting about the value that you find of being a lifelong learner, and maybe for these students in those various areas of both production and music. Like, what do you maybe find yourself these days still tapping into that you began learning at such a young age, and now and you're continuing to add into that, as you and I called it, a toolbox earlier.
Yeah, well, it's that. I mean, not to mix metaphors, it's either a toolbox or a quiver. And the toolbox, because toolbox is, what am I going to grab? Let's see, I don't want to use a hammer to put a screw in, because if I try to do the hammer, the screw is going to be damaged and it won't work anyway. But the other illustration I like is, I'm not an archer, but if I was an archer, I could grab that arrow and go, this is the arrow I need to hit that target. And I've got different kinds of arrows that work in different kinds of situations. And that's part of the learning thing. I think fundamental to all of that is probably best illustrated by an experience I had with a mutual friend of ours, Garrett Gustafson. Garrett and I were in England, and actually we were talking about, we scheduled to have meetings with Kingsway. This is before Thank You Music got brought to the US, and we were talking about that and the potential for the first Worship Together conference. And we arrived at Gatwick.
My students wouldn't be aware that you were part of that initial Worship Together launch and all.
We did the first Worship Together conference at what was our church at that point here in beautiful downtown Franklin / Cool Springs, Tennessee. And God took that and blew on it. It's amazing to see. But Garrett and I were there, and little thing, when you're talking about cross-cultural, it's not just talking about international. It could be cross-denominational. It could be the other side of the town. It could be another language. But what I've discovered is that it's the little things that get you, but it's also the little things that can make you. Here's the illustration. We arrived at Gatwick Airport, south of London, and fortunately there, unlike here, you get a free cart, or they call them trolleys, to put your bags on. And we got our bags, stuck them on the trolleys, and we needed to go to where the rental cars were. And, supermarket trolleys here, carts, the front wheels move, they pivot. The wheels in the back stay the same. So you can always kind of guide it. But in the UK, every wheel pivots.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's not what Garrett said. And I'm throwing him under the bus here in a moment. And to get from that level, they had an incline like you see in some sports stadiums. So we had to go from the third floor down to the first floor. And so we're going around in a circle. And you try to gauge that thing as it's going with all your stuff on it. It takes some learning. In the middle of this, Garrett looks at me and says, "This is just wrong." And I said, "No, Garrett, it's not wrong. It's just different."
That's good.
And so it's the little foxes that spoil the nest, So when you think that you've got it right, let's say about another denomination or another country or another culture, you can get the big things wrong and get tripped up by the little things. Or you can make an overgeneralization and not get it right. I'm thinking of, growing up Catholic, I have an experience of that. And when I hear people make caricatures of it, I say, be careful. Be careful what you're saying. Be careful what you're doing. It's I remember hearing Ravi Zacharias speaking at an international interdenominational event, which I've been able to be a part of. And he said, if you can ridicule another man's religion, then you really don't understand it.
That's good.
And so I think if you can ridicule another man's worship, let's draw a corollary, then you really don't understand it. I'm thinking of, I've got too many illustrations, but when you're old, you got stories. I remember as part of my my master's program at Institute for Worship Studies, where Luke and I both studied, and he's ahead of me. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We were studying history, church history, and we spent a week looking at Orthodox worship. And I'm interested because that's one area I knew nothing about. I wanted to learn. I wanted to grow. I wanted to hear. Okay, here's what happens, and here's why they do that. And here's why the architecture's like that. And on the Sunday, they put us all together and said, we're going to an Orthodox worship service. And I sat there like this the whole time. I'm pretty articulate when I want to be. And after the service, I went to Greg Wildy, who was the professor, and I said, so Greg, the year is 1053, which was the year before the schism, before the Orthodox and Catholic broke up. And I said, so I'm going to church. He said, yep. I said, and church is like that? And he said, yep. And I said, oh. All of a sudden, the penny dropped. And rather than ridicule or make comments about icons or the length of the service or the way they did communion or the fact that there were no places to sit, and you think, you know, Pentecostals, Charismatics, and Baptists complain about standing a long time. The Orthodox stand the whole time. Or Catholic, you know, back row Baptist is a thing no matter what denomination you are. I realized that I came to understand it. And actually last year, I was doing the same kind of thing for my students and explaining the history. And this is in Ukraine, where it's a predominantly Orthodox country. Orthodox and Greek Catholic, which is Orthodox who answered to Rome. It's another story. And I'm explaining it to my students, saying this is what they mean and telling you that experience. And one of my dear students, Dasha, who's afraid I'll forget her, but I will never forget her because of this. She raises her hand and says, Fred, and the three interpreters says, are you even Protestant? And I laughed at her because I said, I am. I'm ordained in that, but here's the deal. I felt like I succeeded because I explained it in a way that wasn't judgmental and made her think I was totally for it. Now, there are lots of things I'm for. I learned a lot of things from that experience that still inform what I do with the people I teach today. But I think we need to have that kind of perspective that we can look at it and say, ooh, what can I draw from here? Rather than judging, to say, why do you do that? What are you thinking when you do that? I think the same is true too. You talked about technology, and technology has become such a major part of our worship in the West and around the world that we can often just adopt technological models without thinking about them theologically. And that's a challenge. So we've got to look at those things and not just assume that because Bethel Jesus Culture Hillsong Elevation did it, that we can do it successfully, or that it even will be meaningful in our context. So we've got to have a critical eye toward that and not just adopt it because it's cool. I'm a techie. I love technology, but we have to be careful to not just adopt it. Willy-nilly, there's an old phrase. We've got to pay attention and ask, why do we do this? For what reason? What purpose is this?
It seems like I remember you talking about students or some scenario with the school that you're affiliated with in Ukraine, and you saw them unpacking something on stage, a certain style or what have you, and come to realize that they were doing what they were doing because basically that's what the West does. And they were just kind of making it look like what that is, versus trying to figure out what is it that's applicable for their scenario, and it kind of goes back to contextualization. But that's where it's the good thing is to learn how to apply to where you are versus just seeing what someone else has done.
Yeah. And I think you have to say, why do they do that? What purpose does it serve? And you have to critically examine your preconceived notions. I mean, I wish, and I keep wanting to do this for my students, and it's not always been possible in Ukraine, to say, okay, this term you will spend half of your Sundays going to a church that you normally wouldn't go to,
Mm-hmm.
and multiple kinds of churches, and come back and here's a set of questions. What did they do? When did they do it? Why did they do it? What did you see, hear, smell, think, feel? Because frankly, there has never, ever, let me say it again, ever been one monolithic worship style on the planet. Now, interestingly enough, we're moving that way, which is not always good. I knew, I always thought it must have been true from the church of my upbringing, the Roman Catholic Church. The Mass was the Mass, and this is what you did. And if you didn't do that, you were excommunicated. Until as early in my studies, I realized that even today within the Catholic Church, there are certain parts of the world that are allowed to have their own liturgy legally. They can do that. It's okay. And that's the localization thing. So that's the thing that we have to balance. The other thing about my Ukrainian students is that they adopted it without thinking. They spend all their time on the interwebs, and they think, well, this is what they're doing in the West, so this must be what worship is. And I challenge that immediately. And just because you have copied the style doesn't mean you have worshiped. Just because you've done it well and you've got the right stem tracks and you know how to run Ableton like nobody's business, and you can switch around and move and do all that stuff and it sounds really cool, doesn't mean that's helping your people worship, helping your people engage or respond in worship.
Yeah. Would you say that your experiences back in the day with Continentals and what have you, how would you think as a lifelong learner that those experiences, what you learned from that, how's that brought you through the previous years up to today at the Ukraine? Like, I guess what I'm saying is, how can you find value in what you learn young and applying it later, and knowing that those things go along with you? You're not learning this information for no reason. There's going to be other reasons for it in the future.
Yeah, I think it's like collecting. It's that toolbox, it's that quiver, it's that collection to say, ooh, this worked there. Let's hold on to that. Now, I tend to be, some people would call me a pack rat. I'd like to say I'm an archivist. You've been to my house, no comments. And so it's like nothing gets wasted, nothing of those experiences. I think early on, what I discovered as a Catholic kid who came to Christ in a music concert in a Nazarene church when a Baptist kid came down off the risers to share Christ with me, I think I was doomed from the beginning. And to be able to stay with Continentals or my teams of light doing international schools work, we would not stay in hotels. That was a rarity if ever happened. We would be in people's homes. So you could see the life of somebody where growing up, they might have said, don't go to that. This isn't true anymore. But if you go to that Baptist church, you have to have permission from the priest to go. That isn't true on any level right at this point or anymore.
Yeah.
Here I am staying in people's homes, getting to know their culture and getting to know them as people. That was, I think I'm answering your question. That was huge because I saw it lived out in people's lives. Although there were other instances, my first experience ever in an Assemblies of God church was being on the platform.
Wow.
And I was going, and this was more old line Pentecostal. It was like, oh yeah, I know I have to stay up here, but can't I run out now? But then I got to see the people's lives and I thought, oh, this isn't necessarily wrong. It's just different. The other thing was with Continentals, everybody was from every possible church on the planet. So you got, and different parts of the country and eventually internationally. So you came to understand it because you lived with those people. And that wasn't, I don't know that it was ever preached that you must learn, but you did learn. Just by absorbing that kid, the Southern Baptist from Florida and the Presbyterian from Pennsylvania could get along, and you went through so many different church experiences. You saw it firsthand, whether it was oh, I don't know. We were all kinds of churches, whether it was let's not go there. The Assemblies of God that I mentioned, or First Baptist Houston, or I don't know, too many, hundreds, thousands of churches of every possible persuasion. So you get to know, oh, you know what? I'm here, and I went through this experience, and lightning did not come out of the sky and strike me dead. So I think that shaped me as a learner to realize it was information, because we're always afraid of what we don't know.
Yes. No.
That's the learning thing. I think learning that early meant, well, I can go there and still survive. I can go into that Orthodox church and learn something. I've probably been worse than personally than what I saw in that first Assembly of God church I went to. If I saw me then, I'd be afraid of me then. If I saw me now then, I'd be what I mean. And right. It's understanding those different things that I think has made it stronger. It means you bring things. I mean, frankly, if you're the worship pastor or the worship leader, whatever your title is, you're the guy who's brought in because you know and have experiences in that area that nobody else does.
Right.
And if all you bring in is, hey, I'm really good at covering that Bethel song, how is that helping your people? You'll look great. It'll sound great. But is it going to minister to the people? Is it going to enable them to respond to the revelation of God in Christ by the Holy Spirit? Not generally, always, hardly ever, maybe not at all. I mean, I love all that. The challenge for me, and even saying this publicly and putting it on recording, is like you and I, we know these people.
Right.
We've worked with them from all these. It's very interesting, and maybe we'll chat about this if you think it's right, about how now it's local churches that are driving it, and everybody wants to be like that church. But if we, where was I going with that? I don't remember. That's I was at Hillsong. I was seeing the thing I saw of Elevation a week or so ago. We think that if we can do it exactly that way, that will be worship, and our people will be blessed, and we'll look great.
Right.
And I don't think any of those can be assumed ever.
No. And I think part of learning, at least it has been for me, and I've tried to teach students this, is that is having to learn wherever you're planted, is to learn who they are, who they're supposed to sound like. And that may not sound like anybody, because you have a particular makeup of singers, DNA, background of songs that congregation loves.
Right.
And so you can't assume, and should never assume, that they're going to sound like or should sound like X, church label, kind of thing. Embrace who they are. And that's you learning them. So whatever circumstance you're in, you got to learn who they are and run with that.
I mean, that's the contextualization piece. That's the idea, is that learning your context, not assuming that you know it. You are not the great hope. I was going to say great white hope, but it could be another ethnicity. The phrase, the great white hope. I know it all. You will now worship. Hallelujah. I am here. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And that's the worst possible approach to take. You really have to know them as people. Guys, it's not about doing a production every week. You know what? I did years of productions. I love great production. I love great production, but it's not about production. If anything, production is to take away distractions so people can focus and respond. And so if you go in with that attitude, you're sunk from the beginning. And that's why, and I don't have the most recent figures, but the last figures I saw was the average contemporary worship leader lasted 18 months in a church position.
Wow, that's unfortunate.
And it's like, what that tells me is they've come in like that. It's like, or the church has said, come in and what's the phrase they always use? Take us to the next level.
Right.
Run away if they say that, because they don't know, but it's almost certain that what you know is not what they want. Just assume that. And so you can go in and say, get to know, as in Ukraine, I say, get to know the babushka, the grandmas. What motivates them? Because they need to be discipled too. You don't pander to the babushka. Yeah. But you have to disciple them to say, the kids have songs too. And maybe your job as a mature believer is to encourage them and not just complain about your music. Yeah. But in the other side of it is the worship leader can't come in that way either. It's like, I have my songs, I'm ready to go. I'm a a 4-year wonder. I've learned all this great stuff at William Carey, and I know it's great stuff. But if you just go in with that, you're going to last 18 months, because especially now, if you try to keep up on the styles change like rain, like the weather. And so if you have a theological basis, if you have an idea of understanding what helps those people, and they know you love them, they'll put up with you when you try something new.
That's right. That's right.
That I guess is it, is realizing that's probably even more important than making sure you know how to use multi-tracks. To speak to the technology people, I mean, I loved this. A guy whose name you won't know, Chris Bowater, you may know that name. He was one of the major British worship leaders. In fact, I've renewed friendship and contact with him on Facebook. And I hear you all saying, okay, boomer. Well, that's fine. I'm a boomer. I asked Chris, I watched him lead worship. He was with Thank You Music, the Kingsway, became worship together. And he had led worship at this event, and it was brilliant. And he was sensitive. He got people engaged. The music didn't get in the way. He was great. But Chris is known as a writer. And in this whole worship set, maybe 45, 50 minutes, he didn't use a single one of his songs. And this is, you know how these are events where the publisher's going, hey, you got to sing the songs off the new record. Right. And that's okay. You want to get that out there. But Chris had done none. And I grabbed him. I said, Chris, I love that. Thank you. But here I have a question. Why did you do that whole worship set and not do any of your own songs? I love his songs. And he said, well, Fred, I see my role as a worship leader as a broker. I'm supposed to be bringing the best of whatever I find to my people. And just because I didn't write them meant the songs got delivered to the wrong mailbox. And I thought, Chris, I'm going to quote you my entire life because of that. So that's your job. Your job as a broker. You're going to bring the best of what's out there, the best of what's in the past, the best of what's in another country, the best of what's in another denomination, the best of liturgy if you don't do liturgy, the best of free worship if you only do liturgy. Songs in other languages, you're tying into what's going on in heaven, and you're helping your people understand that it's not just about me. And that's what, that's the first thing I tell my students is rule 1. And I make them say it in English, although, and a lot of them speak it. I said, when we talk about worship, the first thing to tell you is it's not about you. And they learn that. And so they know that I don't have to say anything when I raise the eyebrow, and they go, I know it's not about me. Because you're there as a servant, and a servant wants to learn. A servant wants to stay current. A servant has to understand the needs of the people and do what will help them, not just what you want. And you know what? There's no way, as brilliant as the education is you're getting, that you're going to learn everything you need to know. It's a given. I don't care what school you go to. I don't care what school you don't go to. If you don't learn to learn, you're done.
Yeah, that's good, because I have from freshmen to seniors who will watch this video, and it can be easy, I guess. As a senior, they're wrapping up, they're tired of reading and writing and studying and lessons and blah, blah, blah. And they go, okay, I'm done. I've learned what I need to know.
Yeah.
So our encouragement to them is, no, you haven't. And try to break that tendency to go, I've learned what I need to know, now to go out here and do this job. Because as you and I have learned, that's not the case. At least if you're going to remain successful and applicable to the changing times, knowledge is power.
Yeah, it is. And staying current does more than just grease the skids. I mean, it helps you it'll keep you young. I mean, the fact that I have a son who's now 29 and he's really in the pop field. I know stuff about hardcore heavy metal that a man my age should never know, and really doesn't want to know.
Do you have the tattoo to show it?
Not to you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, not going to do it. Not going to do it. No, the skin's already too stretched out. Not going to do it. So anyway, it's understanding and appreciating that, and staying current in that way, so you can identify.
Yeah.
If you don't do it, you're done. You're going to be that 18-month wonder, and you're going to be wondering why you're not in that position anymore.
Yeah.
So but the nice thing is, if you're ahead of that, if you're taking time to understand the technology person, and understand the technology of your theology person, and understand the music on both sides, then you're bringing something to the equation in that church or that fellowship that nobody else has.
Yep. That's good.
Everybody, frankly, and you and I know this, everybody has an opinion about music, whether they are entitled to it or not.
Really?
Well, I mean, I've experienced that. Maybe that's one thing I've learned. And it's like, and so they shatter anything that's new because they're afraid of it. And they've identified, you know, uh, they've identified music as worship.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's another thing I preach early on. It's like the conference we do in Ukraine that we're just trying to get online in the next 2 weeks, since we can't hold it live, is called Music in Worship. And they wanted it in English, so it wasn't in Ukrainian or Russian, so you couldn't choose sides. But I start the meetings by saying, music is worship on the screen, and then I draw a line through the is. Music is not worship. Music does not equal worship. Music is an effective biblical way of expressing our worship. And that helps us, because that means that if you've just graduated, or if you're graduating, or if you've just started at university, then you know that you've got a lot to learn, because you don't know just music.
Yeah.
Or you've got a lot to bring if you got a lot to learn, but you also have a lot to bring if you know more than just music.
Yeah.
To be able to take, understand the Psalms, or understand early Christian music, or understand principles of liturgy, or the fourfold structure, can still work in a contemporary setting, and it gives depth and makes people look at you going, well, it's like the head of the seminary in Kiev said to me after I'd done a lecture, and he knew I was a musician. We'd seen God do amazing things in this conference. And Yvonne says to me, after I talked about 3 things that modern worship doesn't pay attention to, I forget what the third one was, but Trinity was one, community, and story. Those are the 3. Mm. And I finished, and he comes up to me with this look on his face. He said, Fred, you are a theologian. It's like, well, yeah, I do have 1 degree in theology, working on the second one. I hope I sound like one. But then they're going, oh, I thought you just sang. But if you can go in and you look like, if you have the skinny jeans, which let's not even talk about those. If you have the skinny jeans or the plaid shirt like Luke is wearing, I really tried to find one this morning, but I don't have big enough arms to really show them off.
Oh,
if you think that's what you got, they think, or they see you as a woman and they go, oh, this chick knows nothing. And that's not to offend you, but that's the attitude that people will often have. And you come in and talk about theology, or talk about this, that, or your understanding of technology, or the conversation you have with the grandma who wants to sing Jesus Paid It All. Oh, you don't just know 3 chords in a song.
That's good.
You're bringing value, and that's what ministry's about.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm preaching again.
No, that's great. So basically, we've given a lot of things for students to think about, but essentially at the end of the day is just don't give up. Just keep finding ways of applying knowledge, be it an online something, reading a book, chatting with a friend, going to a conference. Keep those muscles being built over your life, because it will benefit you.
I mean, you said it very, very well. I think with that, there's some principles we've talked about. We've talked about contextualizations, making it work in your context. You have to think about being flexible. So when you could do a lot of reading and be aware, but you could prejudge everything and say, well, I couldn't possibly do that, but say, what if?
Right.
So being flexible, and then have Chris Bowater's attitude, which is bringing the best to your people, for your people. I had to rethink, after doing all that ministry for years with Continentals a certain way. I got a chance to go back and take over a group for about 6 weeks, no, 4 weeks, when somebody else couldn't lead it. And I thought, boy, I made some other mistakes in the past. Maybe I can change some things around now. And a principle that came out of that time, I think, helps people in the local church. Listen, I had great groups. I could play your recordings. I just listened to one from my 1977. Yes, people did live then. Group that sounded incredible, a cappella choir. And it's amazing that it happened. But my groups hated me because I was all about being the best. They were the best. But I had to learn that my job in ministry was not being the best, but helping my people become their best.
That's good. Yeah.
And so that's why you got to learn. That's why you
Yep.
got to learn. That's why you got to learn.
That's good. Well, students, I hope that you are encouraged to just never give up. Once you finish your undergraduate and your graduate degree, just know that, like Fred and myself, there's still more information that you can glean and learn out there. Whether or not you go for a doctorate or wherever it is, just don't stop learning, and just take it from us. It's worth your while to continue stretching those muscles and building that. Well, Fred, thank you for
thank you
taking a little time out of your day for us and for our worship colloquium. That we would add, students didn't know this, but I had you scheduled to come down to campus and actually spend some time with us, but life just didn't allow that. And but
I wish I could have.
The sake of technology, here we are, though. You get to still speak to students. So students, I hope you're encouraged by this. And Fred, thank you again for your time today. And God bless you, and all that you're hunkering down and doing there in the beautiful Franklin, Tennessee.
I am. Thanks, man. What a joy, as always, to be with you. And I hope to get to meet some of you guys in real life. And if you got questions, Luke can tell you how to get in touch. I'll be glad to help.
That'd be awesome. All right. God bless you, Fred. Thank you.
Bless you, man.
All right.